Hello, welcome to the Self Learning Podcast by Dr. Sushma Singh. Let us start discussion on Unit 6 Political Economy of Development. And our topic is Outline of Political Economy Approach PE. The foregoing clearly sets up the agenda to be addressed by the PE approach, mean political approach, economic approach. Nations have come to be treated as units of analysis. For example, an advanced and backward nations in the development discourse as a result of continually growing international inequalities in the world. The historical world-scale processes of political conquest, ethnic cleansing, unilaterally beneficial economic domination by means of a variety of economic transactions in goods, factors and financial markets, and cultural hegemony as seen markedly over the last 5 centuries or so have made very considerable contribution to these patterns of domination and disempowerment. But differentiation and stratification in regional, interstate, interpersonal, interclass, interoccupational, and many other dimensions within a nation are no less pronounced feature of the present era. A historical overview of the last 5 centuries is bound to show how the internal socio-economic situation and culture of the concerned countries contributed to the process of sharp international disparities and unequal access to and benefits from the processes of modern economic growth. This period can, following brutal, be considered as the era of the capitalist growth, whose diffusion, transmission, forcible imposition, or conscious adoption remains incomplete, uneven, divisive, and on balance, one which created at great multidimensional cost hitherto unprecedented potential and opportunities, which however remain elusive for an overwhelmingly large majority of the humanity on account of the hegemonic control acquired by a tiny minority both across and within nations. The PE approach views the challenge of development in this historical, holistic, long-term, value-laden perspective. It follows that the PE development discourse and policy, which by its very nature has a unified and systematic methodology of its own, and encompasses and integrates many disciplines, taken an approach to development which is simultaneously aggregative and disaggregative, macro as well as micro and meso, and rises above narrow and artificial disciplinary boundaries. It does not necessarily prescribe from above a universally valid and relevant development path, but rather leaves it to be made by development deprived people themselves as they travel along the self-chosen and self-made path. The task of the PED is not necessarily and merely ideological, certainly far from bound to any narrow exclusivist ideology. It has to contend with practical daily bread and butter issues, as well as long-term compulsions and trends at many different levels. It must be recognized that despite its clear superiority on intellectual and practical planes, it does not cohere well with the interest of the powerful stakeholders of the prevalent order. Hence, it remains much less popular and powerful than the narrow, truncated theories of growth and development, steeped essentially in the neoclassical economics. In fact, quite a few political economy approaches adopted the agenda of modern catching up, industrialization, and despite different values and institutional preferences, could not carve out separate, independent, and widely acceptable niche for itself. The fiasco of the existing socialism in many parts of the world is a testimony to the incomplete, partial, and imitative agenda adopted by some of the PE approaches. So much so that even in many strands of political economy approaches, the content and agenda of the development is borrowed practically wholesale from the experience of the early industrialized capitalist countries situated at the top of the unequal globe system. At times, this is done in the name of the universality of the scientific and technological revolution. Thus, instead of advocating alternative and industrialization or alternative to industrialization, and in so far as industrialization and development were treated as synonymous alternative to the development as well. Certain schools of political economy plead for alternative institutional agencies like the state or the cooperative or collectives, and sequence with a view mainly to swiftly and surely catch up and surpass the pioneer industrializers. Of course, in the process hoping to avoid some of the gross inequalities which characterized the capitalist growth path. The objective of replicating the advancement of productive forces at the super high speed for telescoping the process was to be accompanied by a different set of social production relations based essentially on a judicially or formally different kind of social or state ownership and centralized planned public management. It involved hegemonicity of outcomes in terms of lifestyle as reflected in the consumption pattern, but without the massive, unjust, and self-reinforcing inequalities resulting in widespread deprivation and fatality. Thus, the pattern of development in some important aspects, especially in material economic aspect bearing and consumption patterns, product mix, and some major aspect of lifestyle following from physical technical conditions of the work, was technologically determined on the basis of mimetic pursuit of industrial advancement, particularly the neglect of ecological sustainability involved in very high levels of energy and material intensity and spatial concentration of production. As a result of the theoretical advances, lessons at the school of hard knocked and heightened democratic consciousness and commitments, predetermined replications of known and experienced patterns of development, swiftly with lower cost, under supposedly more democratic and accountable institutional dispensations has increasingly fewer advocates. Clearly, one medicine suits all approaches apart from being impervious to different and changing circumstances and context are top down, paternalistic in content and design, and are highly centralized and become in practice non democratic. A political economy approach upholding the values of democratic empowerment of the people, respecting their freedom, dignity, and harmonious social existence cannot stand for a development paradigm which yields involutionary results, fosters alienation and enemies, and restricts people's free choice space, whether individually or through collective, massively large communitarian institutions. The PF of development cannot logically and rationally work in terms of the deterministically predetermined universal concept or pattern of development. No one pattern of a good, wholesome life at individual, family, or communitarian level can be universally accepted or desirable and can respect people's autonomy and freedom and needs, let alone provide for collectively and severally articulated changes in these concepts or patterns. The need, therefore, is not just to get rid of a universal, ethnocentric, involutionary agenda of material well being on the lines imitating the experience of those who made an early start in what has come to be treated as modernization and industrialization and high level of economic growth or development, modern economic growth a la Cousins. The normative aspects, which are essentially ingredient to the PE paradigm of development and are based on values of equity, freedom, human dignity, harmony, happiness, etc., which permits a full flowering of human personality and at the same time contribute to collective good. Essentially, the PE approach avoids binary modes of thinking and thus enlarges the open, plural choice space available individually and collectively, along with the provision of conditions in which the people are unable to exercise their right of making choices. This is the agenda of equitable collective empowerment with its normative baggage as its integral part. It follows that the PE of development cannot proceed with its own agenda in the course of extending and enriching the development discourse without a prior exercise of demolition of the oddities and the distortions which have found their way into it and in fact come to dominate both academic and policy level development discourse and practice. The positive component of agenda thus provides useful opportunities and instruments redefining or redesigning the presently popular development discourse in directions which can meet the challenges hitherto avoided or underplayed in the development discourse. Now let us sum up the unit. Pointing to the global divide between the rich and the poor in both developed and developing countries, and the fact that the growth and income levels are not necessarily an indication of an increase in the standard of living. This unit discusses the political economy of development and some of the important political economy theories of development and its applicability, especially with regard to India. Income cannot be made the only development factor, which seems to be the result of monopolization of the development issues by the economics, especially as it evolved in the rich countries. The income approach basically serves as the process of capital accumulation under the control of a big corporate based on the rich countries. This unit shows the development as a normative, holistic social process, and outcome is the, by definition and its essential logic, the concern of the political economy of development (PED) or development studies (PED). PD requires that in addition to the state and the market, it should address the entire range of civil society institutions and should not focus exclusively on the state, market or NGO. This unit also shows the limitations of capital accumulation and FDI inflows as a means of growth. The liberalization, privatization, globalization LPG package suggested by the IMF and the World Bank for bailing poor and weak economies out of their crisis resulted in a big retreat of the state and disenchantment. A political economy approach cannot stand for a development paradigm which restricts people's free choices and cannot have a predetermined universal pattern of development. Now let us wind up the session, and we have come to the end of the unit. Thank you very much for engaging yourself with the self-learning podcast.